Julia Hartley-Moore and Chris Gallivan on the panel coming up to 5 o'clock. Quite a bit of feedback this afternoon on actually the LED lights in Dunedin. One says here, look, yes, the lights have to be replaced with LEDs. Yes, cats will direct the light down so people can see the night sky. No, we do not have blue-white lights which are cold-looking and dangerous to human and insects. No, residents don't want to overlook a city with a cold light, which will do nothing for our heritage buildings. Solution, we want 2200K warm lights which will match the amber glow of traditional high-pressure sodium lamps, says Liz. So, yes, quite a complicated picture there. And look, regarding the white male, angry white male studies, Paul in St Albans, Christchurch, says, look, I'm a proud POMS, pale old male stale. We are the only ones left who everyone can abuse. Pathetic. Pathetic. I'm so tired that everyone, capital letters, is a victim apart from us POMs. If you think you're a victim and you are weak. Grow up. You all.
Sounds angry. Sounds angry.
Yeah, he sounds like an angry man.
Another one, only some white males make it to a privileged position. Stop putting down males, especially the white underprivileged males. And a lot on what?
We're talking about weren't we talking about middle class men? Underprivileged. You were
right, yeah. Another one, clamping. The French public as a whole encourage people to cut off wheel clamps to the point the campers gave up. Now, I've been meaning to get to this for a while. Calling all coffee snobs. We all have our favourite brews, your classics like your flat whites and long blacks, and then there are those that love the no foam, half calf, extra hot, extra specific Starbucks orders. But then there are those people who swear by certain rules, who are offended by trim milk and decaf. Some cafes are so intense about these points, they refuse to serve anything other than what they deem to be, to quote, the right way to drink coffee. They're called the zero tolerance cafes. Now, a BBC piece on the phenomenon writes about the author's experience of being told they were not allowed to have sugar on their cup of pour over at an American cafe called Oddly Correct, the coffee bar. So it's part of the charm, the strict enforcement of coffee rules. A new high breed, Julia, of high-end coffee places that have zero tolerance policies on sugar, milk and cream.
Goodness me.
Yes. What do you think?
Well, can I just say that, look, here's the thing. See this cup here? Yeah. I had coffee in it. And you know, this is some of the best coffee now. People are going to say I'm no connoisseur, but everyone out there knows, in your little control room, that I love this coffee. They all make me a lovely cup of coffee. As soon as I walk in the door, they know what I like. It's like going to your favourite cafe.
Well, you must be pretty easy to please because it's not that great.
Well, hang on a minute. I think it is. And
you press a button out there, Julia.
I don't care. It's a damn good button. It makes a damn good cup of coffee. And I have a machine that I press a button, it makes a damn good cup of coffee.
All right, so we're no expert here. What about you in Wellington, Chris?
Julia's sounding angry. She just said everything I need. I'm not going to mess with her.
So Julia doesn't know a thing about coffee. What about you?
Look, those places just wouldn't get my trade because...
why not?
Oh, because I just can't be asked with them
all.
Wallace.
Good boy.
I just can't be bothered with... that level of pretentiousness. They want to take themselves that seriously, that's fine, but they're not going to get my dollar. I drink tui, I bloody put tomato sauce on stuff that I shouldn't, and I don't give a rat's.
A rat's. Good boy.
Well, maybe it's time to start giving, start
Perhaps
giving
I'm missing, perhaps Sam I am. I should just try it and I might like it.
How do you have your coffee anyway?
Black.
Strong and bitter.
All right, very good. Great to have you both on. And for me, see you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, should assisted suicide be legal and who for? Proposed euthanasia legislation is likely to be restricted to the terminally ill only. But a group of 75 lawyers still vows to fight the bill, saying it exposes the vulnerable to coercion. What's happened to the millions of dollars raised for the mosque shooting victims? 26,000 people sign a petition to keep the Crusaders' name, and a court hears from witnesses who discovered a hidden camera in the toilets of our Washington DC embassy. And actress Felicity Huffman pleads guilty to participating in a blockbuster US college scam.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia Dawa DNA. If his euthanasia bill survives the next parliamentary vote, ACT's David Seymour is promising to introduce significant amendments to allay fears expressed during public consultation. That would include holding a referendum and restricting assisted dying only to those with a terminal illness. Parliament's Justice Committee has reported back after hearing a record 39,000 public submissions, recommending only technical changes. Mr Seymour says he'd make the changes to get the necessary political support. He was asked how much backing among MPs the bill has at the moment.
My gut feeling is that we're in a positive place, but it's going to take a huge amount of work. We are facing a campaign from what I call a motivated minority who are working very hard. They're frankly spreading misinformation about this bill, but I believe that MPs will take this seriously.
David Seymour says he can't give an exact date for the bill's next reading, but his best estimate is May the 22nd. MPs have repeatedly cited past failures to restrict semi-automatic weapons in speeches about the government's gun laws. They have been speaking on the Arms Amendment Bill, which seeks to ban most semi-automatic rifles and is receiving its second reading in Parliament this afternoon. The chairperson of the Select Committee that considered the bill, Michael Wood, told Parliament the Mayor of Christchurch, Leanne Dalzell, had told the committee another former MP was haunted by the failure to pass stricter gun laws in the 1990s.
She urged us to seize this moment. Mr Speaker, I believe that we as a Parliament are seizing this moment. We should pass this bill with reverence for the victims, with conviction that we are doing the right thing, and hope that we will build a safer community for all of our people.
The Labour MP, Michael Wood. It's expected more than half of Auckland's Anzac Day services will be merged with others as a security precaution following Christchurch. The national president of the RSA, BJ Clark, says he understands around half of last year's 84 services won't go ahead as usual this year and will be combined with larger ones. He says he hasn't heard whether any other regions around the country are amalgamating their services. Mr Clark says the RSAs were the ones to ask for help and it wasn't imposed on them.
And I'm not sure the exact numbers, but they certainly have made a significant reduction in the number of remembrance services that are going to be held on Anzac Day. The District President, Graham Gibson, and the police and the RSAs up there have been working very cooperatively to ensure that the police are able to support services as they wish.
BJ Clark, Auckland Council and Auckland RSA were meeting today to confirm numbers. Christchurch will go ahead with its dawn services as usual, but the number to be held will be released early next week. A lifelong Crusaders fan has over 25,000 signatures on his petition to keep the Super Rugby team's name. The Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby are hiring a research company to get feedback and recommendations on the team's name and branding. The name and image of Crusader Knights on horseback have been condemned as inappropriate since the Christchurch mosque attacks. But Middleton resident and Crusaders fan Shane Cannons has started a petition against the name change. He says the region has already suffered enough.
That's unfair. I think Canterbury's been through enough with earthquakes, and now with this terrorist attack, we don't need to lose our Crusaders as well, the name. So I thought, well, if people can petition for other things, why can't I petition for this?
Shane Cannon says he will see how many signatures the petition can get and then take it to the Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby. Dame Judith Tizard says a piece of land that Fletcher Construction wants to build 480 homes on is Auckland's birthplace. Fletcher has consent to build the homes on special housing area zoned land at Ihumatao near the airport. But 32 hectares of land is culturally significant to Māori and the mana whenua are fighting to have the development stopped. Dame Judith says it's 800 years since the Tainui people settled at the location.
This land has cultural significance, it has human significance beyond any other place that I can speak of in New Zealand.
Dame Judith Tizard says the land was stolen from mana whenua 166 years ago and there's no reason other than money that it can't be returned. It's coming up to 5 past 5. Martin Nonu's bid for a Rugby World Cup return appears to be over after the veteran midfielder was not selected in an extended All Blacks squad. Coach Steve Hansen has named 41 players to attend a Foundation Day in Wellington next week in the first significant step towards winning the Webb Ellis Cup for a third straight time. There are a few notable omissions aside from Nonu, whose last test was the triumphant 2015 World Cup final. The 36-year-old played for French club Toulon before returning to Super Rugby with the Blues. The only uncapped player is in-form Blues number 8, Akira Ioane. Basketballer Jack Salt has made history by becoming the first New Zealander to win the United States NCAA men's college basketball final. Salt and his University of Virginia Cavaliers beat Texas Tech 85-77 in overtime in the match in Minneapolis, although Salt had 5 minutes on court in the final and registered just 1 rebound. Gillian Harmon is the only other New Zealander to have made the final of the college basketball's major showpiece, with Harmon making the women's final with Stanford in 2008. Former Tall Black Kirk Penny reached the final of the NCAA competition with Wisconsin in 2000. The Warriors will tonight appeal the citing of forward Jazz Tevaga for a dangerous tackle in the win over the Gold Coast Titans. Tevaga faces a one-match ban, which could see him miss Saturday's showdown with the fourth-placed South Sydney Rabbitohs. Warriors coach Stephen Kearney feels the NRL hasn't been consistent in its citing. That's the news.
Islamophobia.
Someone dumped a rubbish bag full of dirty diapers outside our front door.
Pay talks stall with teachers.
Beginning teachers move up the salary scale quite quickly. It is quite competitive with other similar professions that those people might consider going into.
And vigilante vegans.
Man only became man because little Australopithecus africanus could use a tomahawk and he could knock over a beast to eat.
Tuck in with us. Morning Report. Weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, a life insurance chief executive warns against a crackdown on sales incentives, saying it could reduce the number of people with insurance. And after 10, Boston University neuroscientist Robert Reinhardt, who's worked out how to reverse memory loss. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine with isolated showers in the west of Northland. Waikato to Taranaki and Taumaranui, fine today, a few showers spreading from the west tomorrow. Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu, also Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today with a few showers tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing about the ranges. For Bulla and northern Westland, rain developing overnight with heavy falls and possible squally thunderstorms later tomorrow. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north later today with heavy falls and thunderstorms, easing to showers in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, fine weather, rain later tomorrow. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, rain developing overnight or tomorrow morning, with a few brief heavy falls easing at night. At the Chatham Islands, patchy rain clearing tomorrow evening. It's just after 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Euthanasia legislation is likely to be amended and restricted only to the terminally ill if it makes it through the next vote in Parliament. After considering a record number of public submissions, Parliament's Justice Committee has delivered its response to David Seymour's euthanasia bill and the changes it thinks should be made. Nearly 38,000 submissions were heard by MPs on the legislation that would allow assisted dying. The 8 MPs on the committee could not come to an agreement about whether the bill should be passed, but made a number of technical recommendations aimed at improving it. At the moment, the bill would cover those with a terminal illness as well as those with serious and incurable diseases. But opposition to the legislation continues, including from some medical and church groups and vocal MPs at Parliament. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
Just hours before the report was made public, this group representing Pacific Island people opposed to the bill gathered at Parliament. They told RNZ they wanted to make their voices heard before the bill progresses any further.
Well, it's coming up to its second reading, so we feel this is our final stand to ensure that it doesn't go any further. So from here on, we like them to vote no, and that this bill does not see the light of day any further.
To listen to us, get down to the level of the community and be with us, walk with us, and to view the bill from another perspective, which is so different to their view and all that, because we are the majority. There are only a few people sitting there making decision for us.
Most of Pacific people, are against this bill, and that's what we've done today on their behalf. They cannot all be here, but we are here for them, and we've taken this action on their behalf.
Inside Parliament, MPs were presented with the changes recommended by the Justice Committee. They include delaying the date the new law would take effect by 6 months to allow government agencies more time to prepare. There are several other technical recommendations. National Party MP and committee member Chris Bishop says in line with past practice, no major changes were made to the bill as it will be a conscience vote, but it was still a worthwhile exercise.
There's a merit in even just hearing the submissions in the first place, so the part of the role of Parliament is the ventilation of arguments and views for and against a particular proposal, so in a process sense in and of itself that's an important thing to do. And the second thing is that those views are not lost to the Parliament, they're actually on the parliamentary record, they're available for any member of the House to go and look up.
The bill's sponsor, ACT leader David Seymour, says if the bill passes its second reading, the main changes will happen after that in the form of amendments, so the whole Parliament has the opportunity to vote on them.
To introduce a referendum to restrict the end-of-life choice bill to those who have a terminal prognosis only.
That second recommendation is a result of the feedback from the consultation process, he says, and would be needed to get the bill through.
There are people who will be suffering badly and whose lives are not going to end within 6 months. I think it's a shame that the bill, if it's restricted, will not give them the choice that they want. But I have listened to what people have said in Select Committee. There is not enough support in Parliament for it to be people who don't have a terminal prognosis. So we are going to try and pass a bill that will help people who have a terminal prognosis.
The vote is one of conscience, so individual MPs can cast their vote according to their personal views. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, will be voting in favour.
I understand those deeply held convictions that some people will have. That means that they'll be opposed to it. My view is the best way that I can allow people to make their own decisions is actually giving them access to that choice.
National MP Maggie Barry says it was a harrowing experience sitting on the committee, listening to the stories of those both for and against. She thinks political opposition to the bill may have hardened after the lengthy consultation period.
As is often the case, members of Parliament will vote something through to the first reading so that there can be a discussion, a select committee process, and this has been a long one. It's been 15 months, and I think that by hearing all the people that asked to be heard, there has been a very robust engagement with the public of New Zealand.
The majority of the 38,000 submissions on the bill were opposed, although David Seymour puts that down to a well-orchestrated campaign from those committed to defeating it. Some public opinion polls have recorded more than 70% support for the legislation. Mr Seymour was asked how he thought the vote would go from here on in.
Look, my gut feeling is that we're in a positive place, but it's going to take a huge amount of work. We are facing a campaign from what I call a motivated minority who are working very hard. They're frankly spreading misinformation about this bill, but I believe that MPs will take this seriously, that they'll look for evidence.
David Seymour says he can't give an exact date about when the next reading will be, but his best estimate is May the 22nd. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A group of 75 lawyers says it may have to take legal action to stop the end-of-life choice bill, saying its loose criteria leaves vulnerable people open to coercion. Lawyers for Vulnerable New Zealanders says there's no guarantee the proposed law will only apply to terminally ill people. Its spokesperson, Dr. Huhana Hiki, is a legal academic and has multiple sclerosis. She says the group that launched today is concerned for the elderly, the lonely and especially Māori.
Many disabled Māori are a part of the problem where they're trying to access healthcare but often cannot due to the institutionalised racism we experience. You're putting poor people, people at risk, into a position where they may end up having no choice other than to choose euthanasia because Pharmac refused to fund their drugs, Others refuse to give them care, and we have a very underfunded palliative care system. Those are the people we've got a problem with. There are three aspects of this bill which are a big problem for us, and that is coercion, cover-up and criteria. Those are the three areas that we've identified as being problematic in this bill.
Well, let's address some of those points, because David Seymour says that this bill ultimately will only be available to those people who are terminally ill, who have 6 months or less to live, that they are removing the clause that refers to deteriorating conditions, irremediable medical conditions and grievous medical conditions. He says that's going.
Well, first up, the Select Committee have said they cannot come to an agreement on this bill, which means it's problematic. They have not agreed to any changes. They have not agreed to make those provisions that he's identified. But
so you don't trust his word on that?
No, I don't. David Seymour's own record, I don't trust his word on much these days. And I mean, he says one thing and then goes and does another, but he has never addressed the issue around underfunding of palliative care. He's never addressed the issue around racism within the health sector. He's never addressed the issue around disabled trying to access health care. So if he's not addressing the issue of those of us who are trying to live with quality of life, then how do we know he's going to safely address the issue of us dying?
On the issue of disabled people, some submitted in this process and said they should be included in this because they're quite capable of making their own decisions for themselves.
Some are, but that's the problem. This bill is catered for those who are confident, who are articulate, who are able to understand exactly what the issues are. Many of the disabled do not want to end up dying. They want to live with dignity before they have that choice. They're not given the choice to live in dignity because we're severely underfunded, cannot access healthcare. I'm part of the postcode discrimination living in Counties Manukau, where I can't get the procedures I need to get within a timely fashion at Auckland Hospital. So it's a problem that we've got is what is choice? If it is free choice, how free is that choice if people are just doing it because they can't access what they need to in the life that they've got?
So what do you and this group of lawyers plan to do? What happens now?
We will take legal challenges if we need to. So it all comes down to the second reading and to see where it goes from there. But there's also around Māori and the rights of Māori under the treaty, Article 3 of the Treaty of Waitangi, and that potentially becomes a treaty claim. So we could be looking at legal challenges for a number of years.
So when you say Waitangi claim, would you take one on the basis it discriminates further against vulnerable Māori? Would that be the basis? And in terms of other legal challenges?
I haven't explored it personally myself much further, but there are legal challenges internationally and we will probably be following. And part of that problem we've got, again, is if you limit the criteria to one group, exclude others, under our human rights law, we can't have that type of disparity. So there's going to be a problem where some disabled are going to say, I want the right to die. And they're going to come on board and say, but I'm not terminal. What's happened internationally is you've got people with depression, diabetes, already being euthanised. You've got people who just say, I'm old.
I'm just going to... I need to ask you for clarification there, Dr Hickey, because I did those list of conditions, like, for example, diabetes. Has someone seriously been euthanised who has diabetes and that been the primary reason for them being allowed to kill themselves?
Belgium, yes. You don't need that reason. You only need to be old. You only need to be a child these days. There's also Canada is currently looking at mature minors and not informing families until after they've been euthanised. So yes, it is happening. You don't need a medical reason to go to Switzerland and end your life.
Because David Seymour would say to that opposition to this bill is coming from a small, well-organised, vocal minority, and that some of the conditions being listed, like diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, cystic fibrosis, would never pass the test for this.
Let's look at international law. Let's look at where they have actually enacted. In Belgium, it took 22 years to include children and non-terminal cases. It's already starting to happen in Canada, where it's only taken 2 years, and they're now exploring that. So we cannot say it will never happen. There's no such thing as never in legislation. Once you let government get involved, once the state is involved, once all of those start to take over, there are changes to the law. It will be extended. It will be guaranteed to be extended because you cannot make it an entrenched piece of law. It won't happen.
Are you a small vocal minority who is flying in the face of the majority?
Given that over 90% of those submissions were opposed, and they're not all religious people, I would say no.
David Seymour.
But not everyone's vocal.
David Seymour would say that a number of those submissions were rote submissions, and they were from religious groups in the large, he would argue.
He would, because that's his way of trying to dismiss and diminish the reality of what's happening here. There are a lot of non-religious people that also submitted. I'm one of them. I don't do this based on a religious belief because I don't have one. I do it based purely on human rights and my experience and work with people that are disparate and face huge disparities and vulnerability within our health sector. The disability sector are one of those groups. Some within our sector, ironically, they happen to all be white. People have all said that they would like the choice one day, and it's for things like osteoarthritis. It's not for terminal illness. I've got osteoarthritis. It's a ridiculous thing to want to die over. If you've got adequate pain relief, you can get adequate treatment for it. But people are talking about wanting to die because they're not living a good life now.
And that's Dr. Huhana Hiki. We are keen for your feedback on the bill and euthanasia in general. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After 6 o'clock, we will hear from David Seymour about the report. But right now, it is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some family members of mosque shooting victims are struggling to make ends meet as they're not eligible for ACC cover. Yesterday we had the story of Mohammed Masood, who had been at the bedside of his paralysed wife for up to 18 hours a day. He's not been able to return to work but will not receive anything from ACC to cover his lost wages because he himself was not injured. Today a similar story has come to light. So what's happened to the millions of dollars raised by the public in the weeks after the attack? Christchurch reporter Conan Young investigates.
Yama Nabi was running late for Friday prayers at Al Noor Mosque and avoided being shot by just minutes. His father, Haji Daud Nabi, was amongst the 50 who lost their lives that day. Yama Nabi saw many of the dead and injured as he searched the mosque for his father, images that have stuck in his mind. He's had trouble sleeping ever since.
Seeing all that tragedy what had been happening, running toward the mosque, and then the body and another, body, and then all these things, the brothers have to see their dad, in that state. And I have not done well.
Yama Nabi isn't ready to return to his job as a halal butcher due to fears the amount of blood he has to deal with in his work will trigger flashbacks of that day. He went to his doctor, who gave him a form to hand in to ACC, but the agency says it can't help him with his lost wages.
That's it, the victim, or, you went at the mosque and all that, and they declined the application.
So what about the millions of dollars donated by ordinary New Zealanders for the victims and their families, including the people left behind to pick up the pieces? So far, $2.7 million has been raised by the Islamic Information Centre and $4.8 million by the Christchurch Foundation. The largest amount, over $9 million, has been donated to the Give a Little campaign started by Victim Support. Of the latter, a fraction, $1.6 million, has been paid directly to victims and their families to cover a range of costs. The Pakistan Association of New Zealand has been acting as a go-between to help the money get to where it is most needed. Its head, Asim Mukhtar, says any delays are often due to cultural and language differences.
Where we're coming from, it's very hard to ask for the money. Some of the people got shy or feel embarrassed that not to ask for the money, but when they realize that, they have already spent all their money and now they need the money, but it's too late.
Mr Mukhtar says in his experience, Victim Support has been amenable to helping meet the living costs of family members who are struggling to get back to work. He's recommending the money be paid in instalments rather than in one lump sum.
Because at the moment the families obviously do not know what to do with the money. If they get $100,000 deposited in their account, they do not know with that how to spend it and all that. At the moment they are in distress.
But should those struggling after a tragedy such as the mosque shootings be reliant on the generosity of strangers to help meet their everyday needs? RNZ understands the government is considering broadening the definition of who's eligible for mental trauma funding under ACC. Whether that extends to people such as Yama Nabi remains to be seen. Today, the Prime Minister said it was her expectation that ACC would move quickly to help those in need.
I would like to hear directly, and we can put in touch any families who are finding that is not the case. You know, ACC are well equipped to move quickly. I would expect in these cases that they absolutely will be.
A victim support spokesperson says emergency grants have already been given out to families, $5,000 for each person hospitalised and $15,000 for the families of each deceased person. But in some cases, such as Yama Nabi's, that hasn't stretched far enough to cover lost wages. Victim support says there will be a variety of views on how the remainder of the money is spent, and getting this right is going to take some time. Kei o te tahi ahau, mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Konanyang tēnei.
The National Party is pushing for gun law exemptions to be broadened to more groups as the legislation banning most semi-automatic weapons continues its rapid progress through Parliament. The Arms Amendment Bill was the focus for MPs today as it had its second reading just 25 days after the Christchurch terror attacks. Te Aniwa Hurahanganui reports.
MPs have come back to the House to debate the fast-track gun laws after the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee received and reviewed more than 12,000 written submissions. Police Minister Stuart Nash began his opening address by speaking out against religious and cultural intolerance, quoting from Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice.
If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? Mr. Speaker, we are hurt with weapons, but unlike that speech, we are not seeking revenge. We are seeking safety. We have to stop this happening again.
Minor changes to the bill have been recommended, including allowing commercial businesses which specialise in pest control to continue using semi-automatics. However, the National Party's police spokesperson Chris Bishop says he's disappointed that sporting competitors won't also get an exemption.
Those who compete in international sporting shooting competitions are going to be hard done by as a result of this bill. It must be within the Parliament's competence and ability to design a regime that allows for a very narrow class of people to compete in international competitions that involve what are now going to be prohibited weapons.
National is also unhappy that the bill will give the government the power to decide further regulations on such things as types of ammunition instead of writing them into law. Licensed dealers and people authorised by the Department of Conservation to kill or hunt animals considered pests would be exempt. But farmers have missed out, despite their efforts to convince MPs semi-automatic firearms are essential for managing pests on private land. New Zealand First MP Mark Patterson says the committee may have to revisit that in the second phase of firearm reforms.
We need to keep it tight at the start. No, New Zealand First fully supports that. But there is significant challenges on our farms, and it's not just rabbits and possums. You're looking at wallabies, tahr, goats, deer.
The bill would prohibit most semi-automatic firearms, parts that convert firearms into semi-automatic firearms, magazines over a certain capacity, and some shotguns. Owners of illegal firearms have until the end of September to hand them in to authorities. But a lack of detail around the buyback scheme has many MPs, including National's Ian McKelvey, worried.
If we don't get this into action very quickly, we're going to struggle to get much action in the time that amnesty has allowed, because I don't think we'll see many people handing guns in until they have some certainty around where that buyback gets to and how those guns are actually stored and recorded until such time as they're paid out for them.
MPs repeatedly cited past failures to restrict semi-automatic weapons. The chairperson of the Select Committee that considered the bill, Michael Wood, told Parliament the Mayor of Christchurch, Leanne Dalzell, had told them another former MP was haunted by the failure to pass stricter gun laws in the 1990s.
She urged us to seize this moment. Mr. Speaker,
I believe that we as a Parliament are seizing this moment. We should pass this bill with reverence for the victims, with conviction that we are doing the right thing, and hope that we will build a safer community for all of our people.
The legislation is expected to be passed into law by the end of the week. For Checkpoint, I'm Tianiwa Hurihanganui.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, actress Felicity Huffman pleads guilty to participating in the largest ever college admission scam. Flaxmere community leaders plead for a line in the sand to be drawn on alcohol. And speaking of alcohol, how one Arrowtown man who had one too many drinks got slapped with a Freedom Camping fine. As always, we'd love your feedback, so tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can text us on 2101 or email us at checkpointinrnz.co.nz. But here's Susanna Leotawa with the headlines.
The Arms Amendment Bill has passed its second reading in Parliament. The bill passed 119 votes for and 1 vote against and will go through its committee stages and third reading tomorrow. It seeks to ban most semi-automatic rifles to prevent a repeat of the Christchurch mosque attacks in which 50 people were killed and dozens wounded by gunfire. Parliament's Justice Committee has reported back on ACT MP David Seymour's euthanasia bill after hearing 38,000 public submissions. The 8 members couldn't agree on whether the bill should proceed, but have recommended technical changes to improve it. If the bill passes its second reading, Mr Seymour says he'll introduce amendments, including a referendum and restricting it to the terminally ill. A Crusaders fan has over 25,000 signatures on a petition to keep the Super Rugby team's name. The Crusaders have enlisted a research company as it mulls at changing the rugby team's branding following the massacre of Muslims in Christchurch last month. The name and image of Crusader Knights have been seen as inappropriate since the mosque attacks. Shane Cannons of Middleton has started a petition to keep the name, saying the region has already suffered enough. Former MP Judith Tizard says a piece of land Fletcher Building plans to develop is the birthplace of Auckland. Fletcher has consent to build 450 houses on special housing area zoned land at Ihumātao near the airport. But 32 hectares of land is culturally significant to Māori, and mana whenua are fighting to stop the development. The Transport Agency says the Waiho Bridge near Fox Glacier, washed away in floodwaters a fortnight ago, cannot be replaced until a crane part arrives. Army engineers were to launch a replacement today, then secure it before reopening the vital Fox Glacier and Franz Josef line on Friday. The agency says heavy rain is also on the way, and it cannot say if the delay will affect the opening date. 3 fire crews are fighting a hayshed fire near Darfield, which has been burning since about 3 o'clock this afternoon. A fire and emergency spokesperson says they worked with the property owner and used a digger to bring the blaze under control. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And Nona Peltier is in the studio to talk business. Financial Markets Authority, it's withdrawn an insider trading charge against an accountant. Why? What's going on?
Well, it's a difficult thing to take these kinds of cases, and so the FMA had an opportunity to settle with the accused. His name is Mark Talbot, and he basically was accused of insider trading associated with a public listed company. He said, listen, I'll pay you a $150,000 fine. He agreed to be banned from working in a public company for 5 years, or a company, and also pled guilty to a lesser charge of failure to disclose, in disclosure of documents. So, all said, the Financial Markets Authority got the result they wanted, in the sense that the Chief Enforcement Officer for the Financial Markets Authority, Karen Chang, says that these kinds of things work well because it informs others about the perils of doing the wrong thing when it comes to trading with a public company. And here's what she had to say.
Because every time we look at a potential resolution offer, we always have to go back to what was it that we were seeking to achieve in the first place with the criminal prosecution. And in this case, it was to hold the individual to account, obviously, but also probably more importantly, to send that strong deterrent message and also educate the market on what is and is not acceptable conduct. And then when you compare that to what was on offer in the resolution, we have a criminal conviction even though that was for the lesser charge, that's not an insignificant outcome for someone who is a professional and whose reputation is important to them, together with a public, detailed admission of engaging in insider trading conduct and a payment of $150,000 where, even if he was convicted at trial, he was unlikely to face a term of imprisonment and unlikely to be fined for an amount that's comparable to $150,000.
And so that's the Karen Chang from the FMA. Now, the accused in this case, Mark Talbot, he issued a statement this afternoon saying, look, he was a bit naive. He says that he wants others to think very hard before taking a job with a public listed company because there's a lot of responsibilities, some of which he didn't, of course, uphold.
On another legal issue, this is the legal battle over the failed construction firm Mainzeal, and it's kind of got a bit more complicated because the liquidators now are filing a counterclaim against the directors who filed an appeal against an earlier ruling, isn't it? So what's going on?
Look, this has been dragging through the courts for some time, as our listeners will be aware. It's a difficult situation. So the creditors are owed something like, I think it's about $150 million. It's a lot of money. Anyway, they were given $36 million in the courts, the High Court, and the director said, oh, that's a lot. And one of the directors, of course, is our former Prime Minister, Dame Jenny Shipley. They've appealed, and the liquidators for Mainzeal that are acting on behalf of the creditors said, okay, we're going to cross appeal. We're going to ask for twice as much as you were awarded in the first place. So instead of $36 million, we're going to go for 73, and that's that. So
have they given a basis for doubling their demands?
What I said before, there was $110 million that creditors were owed, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
So yeah. So they went for less because that was their legal advice. So creditors are still going to be out of pocket, but they're going to get potentially they're going to get a bigger settlement. We'll see what happens. But yeah, we were talking about $36 million, $110 million is owed, and $73.3 million is what's being sought now in this appeal. Now, this case is probably going to drag on for some time, you can expect.
Yeah, months. Okay, what else has been going on the markets today?
Let's see. Yeah, so we dropped nearly 0.25%. That's 20 points down to 9,787, and the dollar is trading at 67.5 US cents, 94.5 Australian, and 51.6 pence, which is about where we were yesterday too.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with your business news. Now, the jury in the trial of a top Defence Force official has heard from two men who discovered a hidden camera in a bathroom at New Zealand's embassy in Washington, D.C. Alfred Harold Keating is on trial in the Auckland District Court, accused of attempting to make intimate visual recordings in a toilet at the embassy. The 59-year-old, who was the top Defence Force attaché at the time, has strenuously denied planting the covert device. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, was at the trial today and she filed this report.
Jerry Navarro was brushing his teeth in a unisex bathroom when he first noticed a little black box tucked under a heater on the wall. It was the 27th of July 2017 and he was working as a driver at the embassy in Washington, D.C. Today he described what he saw to a jury at the Auckland District Court via video link.
When I went to the bathroom, I had my toothbrush with me. I'm planning to brush my teeth, and I saw a small black plastic device underneath the heater. I pick it up, sir, and just look it up, and then I put it back on in the top of the radiator.
Crown Prosecutor Henry Steele asked Mr. Navarro what he made of the finding.
Did you have any idea of what it was at that stage?
Totally, I have no idea, sir, what it was, sir.
And what made you put it back on top of the radiator?
Because I assumed that somebody forgot it, and then I put it back. I thought that somebody might come back to get it, sir.
Were you at all concerned by its presence in the bathroom?
I'm not that concerned, sir, at that time, sir.
It's the Crown's case that Mr. Keating had earlier hidden the small motion-activated camera wearing a pair of blue latex gloves. Yesterday, Mr. Steele told the jury a forensic examination of the device found DNA on the camera's memory card matched that of Mr. Keating. Though Mr. Navarro was the first to see the covert camera, it was Stephen Warren, an embassy staffer working for the Defence Force, who raised the alarm. He went to the bathroom after Mr. Navarro and saw the little black box on the heater. He described it like this.
Black box, probably about inch and a half thick, 3 or 4 inches long, I'm guessing. It appeared to be I thought it was a hard drive.
Mr. Warren said he had a gut feeling the little black box was more than just a hard drive and picked it up for a better look.
I picked up the black box which was on top of the radiator. I held it in my hand. I spun it around. I noticed some small holes and what appeared to be a lens of some type.
Mr. Warren said he kept a grasp on the camera and put it in his pocket before going to his trusted colleague Daniel Runk. CCTV footage played to the jury shows the pair standing outside the front of the embassy and Mr. Warren revealing the camera. Mr. Runk told the court he briefly inspected the device and, concluding it looked dodgy, told his friend to report it to the Consul General, sparking a police investigation. Mr. Keating has strenuously denied the allegations. In cross-examining Mr. Warren today, his lawyer, Ron Mansfield, questioned why the official, who has a police background, handled the device if he thought it might be suspicious.
You would know that potentially the police or the security at the embassy might be interested in such a device?
Did not know what the device was. I thought it was a hard drive.
But even if it was a hard drive left behind, that would create a security issue, wouldn't it?
Potentially.
In his opening address yesterday, Crown Prosecutor Henry Steele said Mr. Keating's personal laptop was searched 4 months after the discovery, and police found internet searches relating to the camera. The trial before Judge Robert Ronayne and a jury of 10 women and 2 men is set down for 2 weeks. At the Auckland District Court, this is Arnica Smith.
And we're getting a lot of feedback from you on the euthanasia bill, which a report from the Select Committee has come out today. So let's get to some of this. This from Chris from Auckland, who says, my father lived in Switzerland and signed up to Dignitas. He died of cancer and never actually activated it. But the fact that he had the option was a great security to him. I think the bill should go ahead, says Chris. This one, hi, in regards to euthanasia, as an emergency nurse of 14 years, I absolutely, without doubt, want the choice to end my life when the time comes. The suffering of humanity I have seen is beyond cruel, the nurse says. And this one on religious beliefs and drafting legislation. The texter says religious beliefs have no place in forming public policy, particularly in a secular state. Mention God and your submission should be tossed. Religion, this person says, is just organised ignorance. Keep your feedback coming. Actress Felicity Huffman and 13 other people have agreed to plead guilty to participating in what prosecutors call the largest college admissions scam uncovered in US history. Lisa Bernard reports.
Actress Felicity Huffman has agreed to plead guilty to participating in the largest college admissions scandal in U.S. history. In a statement, the former Desperate Housewives star, who's accused of paying $15,000 to have her daughter's SAT responses secretly doctored, said she was, quote, ashamed of the pain I have caused my daughter, my family, my friends, my colleagues, and the educational community. Adding, quote, my daughter knew absolutely nothing about my actions, and in my misguided and profoundly wrong way, I have betrayed her. The plea deal allows Huffman to avoid a potentially embarrassing and messy trial, says Reuters correspondent Nate Raymond.
Federal prosecutors have actually agreed to recommend a prison term for Huffman at the low end of 4 to 10 months. She has also agreed to pay a $20,000 fine and restitution. It's a very low and favorable sentence for a white-collar defendant in a case like this. You know, it's possible she might face no prison time. Sentencing at the federal level is entirely at a judge's discretion.
Huffman is among 13 other parents who on Monday also said they will enter guilty pleas. Her husband, actor William H. Macy, was not charged in the case. The mastermind behind the scheme, California college counselor William Rick Singer, pled guilty last month and is cooperating with authorities. Singer allegedly received a total of $25 million from wealthy parents to get their kids into top colleges, such as Yale and Stanford, by cheating on entrance exams and paying bribes to coaches. In all, 50 people were indicted, including former Full House star Lori Loughlin and husband Massimo Giannulli, a fashion designer, both of whom appeared in court last week. They are accused of paying $500,000 to have their 2 daughters, including social media influencer Olivia Jade, named as recruits to USC's crew team, even though neither one is a competitive rower.
And Flaxmere community leaders are pleading for the judiciary to draw a line in the sand around the harm caused by alcohol. Giving evidence before the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority, which will decide whether to renew Flaxmere Liquor's licence, Hastings District Councillor Henare O'Keefe and Kaumatua Des Ratima said most of the suburb's social ills are linked to alcohol abuse. But that was only after they set a groundbreaking precedent that allowed Mr Ratima to speak at all. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley was at the hearing and filed this report.
In a rousing and at times teary speech, Henare O'Keefe said Flaxmere was in the midst of, quote, an alcohol holocaust.
As a foster parent to over 200 children, I have personally, along with my wife, picked up the pieces, picked up those broken families and put them back together again, well, attempted to in many cases. And alcohol has been at the heart of it.
And he urged the chair of the authority, Judge Kevin Kelly, to be courageous in his decision-making.
My challenge to the judiciary on this day is draw a line in the sand. Draw a line in the sand. Be bold. Be courageous. I hope that resonates with your heart. I hope that caresses your ear ever so kindly. This is a cry for help.
The chair of Takutimu District Māori Council, Flaxmere Kaumatua Des Ratima, said it was morally and ethically wrong to have 3 bottle stores in such a small community.
The more sites like this that are opened up or are allowed to stay open, the more normal it appears to our younger people. And if this renewal is not challenged, then our people will see it as being normal, therefore okay.
Des Ratima almost didn't get a chance to speak at all. Before the hearing began, the lawyer for the owners of Flaxmere Liquor, Pravinda Kaur, argued Mr Ratima didn't qualify to give evidence because he didn't live within 1 kilometre of the store. But Mr Ratima's lawyer, Janet Mason, successfully argued, and for the first time ever, that he did have the right because his role as an elected member of the Māori Council gave him a statutory duty to look after his constituents' needs. Des Ratima later had this to say to Flaxmere Liquor owner Chamka Singh.
And I want to say this to Mr Singh. This is not a personal issue. This is a people issue. The only time we can speak is when there's a consent that's available for public submission, or when there's a reconsent that's available for public submission. If they're not, we have no voice. We suffer the impacts of that.
Mr Singh's lawyer, Pravinda Kaur, said her client has been a responsible owner and there was no proof the store itself had caused harm.
The applicant is a suitable entity to continue to hold an off-licence and can be trusted to meet its obligation in law. The days and hours sought by the applicant are reasonable, and there is no evidence of harm arising as a consequence of these hours.
But Janet Mason argued Treaty of Waitangi principle should apply to the Sale and Supply of Liquor Act, given more than half of Flaxmere's population is Māori.
58% of the people in Flaxmere are Māori. The District Māori Council, and under its Act, which is the Māori Community Development Act, has a responsibility to ensure that there is no harm to Māori communities as a result of alcohol, and that's specifically stated in there. So the interaction between that Act and the Sale of Liquor Act means that the treaty is relevant.
If this argument is successful, it could set another groundbreaking precedent, which could be used by other Māori communities opposing liquor licences. The Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority has reserved its decision. In Hastings for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It is about 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch if you'd like to comment on anything you've heard in the program today. You can tweet us on 2101. No, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In an unprecedented move, the US has designated Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard as a foreign terrorist organisation. The President Donald Trump says Iran is not only a state sponsor of terrorism, but has also allowed the Revolutionary Guard to actively participate in, finance and promote terrorism as a tool of the state. From Washington, here's the ABC's Zoe Daniel.
Donald Trump has made no secret of his antipathy towards Iran. Having pulled the US out of the nuclear deal between the two countries, he's now tackling the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard, despite misgivings even within the administration. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is hosing that down.
This designation is a direct response to an outlaw regime and should surprise no one.
The declaration will allow travel and economic sanctions to be imposed on the Guard's members and backers and may overflow to associates in other countries. There are concerns, for example, that members of the Iraqi government may be affected. There are also concerns that European companies doing business in Iran will be caught out by the sanctions. Too bad, says the Trump administration.
The Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guard Corps has actively engaged in terrorism and created, supported, and directed other terrorist groups. The IRGC masquerades as a legitimate military organization, but none of us should be fooled.
The IRGC has around 150,000 personnel and oversees Iran's strategic weapons. It also helps suppress domestic dissent, is involved in running the economy and exerts influence elsewhere in the Middle East by providing money, weapons and training to allied governments and armed groups.
The IRGC will take its rightful place on the same list as terror groups it supports: Lebanese Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Kataib Hezbollah, all of which are already designated as foreign terrorist organizations.
And while this is the first time the US has applied that label to part of another country's government, Special Representative for Iran Brian Hook says that won't create a broader problem.
The FTO tool is something that we have used since 1993, I want to say over 60 times. And we're still able to execute our diplomacy and our foreign policy without any impediments.
This is the first time you've done it to a government entity. That's why I'm asking the question.
Doing this will not impede our diplomacy.
It will give the US criminal powers against those it's targeting. Nathan Sales, US Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism.
The law provides that it is a federal criminal offence punishable by up to 20 years in prison for any person who provides material support to a designated foreign terrorist organisation.
Iran denies supporting terrorists and has responded by declaring US Central Command for the Middle East and Africa a terrorist organisation.
The ABC's Zoe Daniel with that report. An Arrowtown man is worried a hardline stance on freedom camping will encourage reckless driving after he was given a $200 fine for parking up overnight in central Queenstown because he'd had a few too many and needed to stay there overnight. Glenn Wallace has paid the fine but says the blanket policy on freedom camping doesn't take into account resting drivers or people who are doing the right thing because they're over the limit. I asked him what happened.
I'd had a few fizzy bubblies, but yeah, I mean, you know, I'd sort of gone out for a few friends. It was quite a late night. Yeah, and just sort of decided that I was over the limit. But I had a busy day the next day, so I thought the best option was just to sleep in my car and then get up early, wake up early, and then, you know, hopefully find my way home. But yeah, I obviously was a bit more drunk than I thought I was. I didn't wake up sort of 10 o'clock in the morning with a screaming headache and, yeah, with a freedom camping fine.
Yeah, with a surprise on the windscreen, was it? Can you just explain what is the ticket when you plucked it out that morning? What did it say? What was it?
Well, it basically just said that I was being fined $200 for freedom camping, which I thought was a bit strange because I've lived in Arrowtown for 16 years and been a ratepayer and been on just about every committee under the sun and coached rugby, and I've put a lot back into the community, so I wasn't too concerned at the time. I thought, oh, yeah, well, surely I'll get off this because, you know, I am a ratepayer and, you know, I essentially pay the bills around here. But, yeah, I went into the council and they said no, computer says no, so...
Why does computer say no? If indeed you are a resident and you pay rates, and as you say, you're not a freedom camper, why couldn't they waive it? What was their reason?
Computers don't make mistakes, but the programmers that are putting in the information, they do make mistakes because ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't know who's feeding all this stuff into the system, but, you know, it really has bureaucracy gone mad. You know, I used to be proud to say that I was a Kiwi, and now I'm a little bit embarrassed because in the good old days we used to be a can-do country, but now we're a can't-do country.
So, blanket rule, no exceptions. That's the deal?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So have you paid your $200?
Yeah, I paid the $200 because, once again, it wasn't really a money issue for me. It was more of a principle issue. I could have got a taxi home, which would have cost me $80. I would have left my car in the middle of town, which would have been a $40 parking ticket, and then another $80 taxi back to get my car in the morning equals $200. So I thought I was being responsible and not driving. I'm lucky enough that I can actually afford to get a taxi home, but I'd hate to think that, what a young person out there with no money, what they're expected to do in that situation. It's a basic human right that you should be allowed to have, some protection when you're out in the elements.
Hey, so what do you think should happen now then?
Well, I don't know, because, I actually switched my phone off yesterday. I didn't realise this was going to be such a big storm in a teacup, but it appears to be happening all over New Zealand.
What do you mean? People getting tickets for sleeping in their cars, or?
Yeah. I mean, from what I've heard, I listened to a little bit of talkback radio last night. Councils, basically charging people with lots of money that can't afford to pay it, and they find themselves in very sticky situations. I've ran my own business for the past 12 years, and I'm accountable for everything that goes on. I don't even know whether it's the local council's problem. I really think this is a problem for the leader of the country to sort of address it and give a bit of governmentship as to what's going on.
Do you think that residents should have some kind of exemption from this rule, like a sticker or something that you stick on your car which shows you're a resident?
It's very simple for me. I mean, if you're a ratepayer, you should not be being fined for freedom camping. If you get tired and want to pull over on the side of the road and have a sleep, you'll be fined for that these days, apparently. Apparently you're not allowed to sleep within 200 metres of the road because you're classed as a freedom camper. There are signs everywhere saying, if you're tired, pull over and take a break. Now, for some people, 40 minutes is not going to be long enough. You're going to need a bit more time than that to get back into. Does a truck driver get a freedom camping fine when he pulls over on the side of the road?
So were there anybody parked up around you having a sleep as well? Did you see any other genuine freedom campers parked up near you?
No, I was right outside a bar in Queenstown. It was Wilkinson's Pharmacy, right in the middle of town. It's not exactly a freedom camping zone,
So you were alone in your ute, having a wee nap?
Yeah, having a wee nap, yeah.
OK, well, let's put it to the test, though, Glenn. Freedom camping is also concerns about toileting. What did you do? Where'd you go for?
Well, I mean, it's all obviously an education process, but from what I've seen, the majority of freedom campers are very respectful. I used to do a lot of travelling myself, and I actually talked and picked up a lot of hitchhikers, and the majority of them are fine. But yes, there are the odd bad apples that go and shit everywhere and take it for granted and so on.
So what did you do though, Glenn? Because you were camped out overnight in your ute. When you needed to go to the loo, did you go to the loo somewhere on the street or nearby or in a garden, or what did you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd been in a bar, so I'd gone to the toilet before I got in my truck and then passed out basically. So you didn't need to go for a wee during the night? No, I'm 45 years old. I can manage to get through the morning without peeing myself. But I would like to see change. I would like to see a bit of common sense come back into this country, rather than just everyone saying computer says no and not really caring. And that's Glenn Wallace, who was fined $200 for freedom camping when he spent the night in his car after he'd had one too many. Let's get to some of your feedback now. It is flooding in on the euthanasia bill. We'll try to get to as much of it as we can. This from Shirley. Shirley says it's not as simple as giving clear-thinking people the right to make their
own choice over ending their life. This presumption leaves the vulnerable open to coercion when they need protection. Now, we got a lengthy text from Helen. I'll try to get through as much as I can of it. She says she's pro-assisted dying. She made a submission. She's cared for 2 family members who died from cancer, and she says, I would not wish their last weeks on anyone. She also has been diagnosed with cancer, and she says, I want assisted death in my arsenal should my prognosis worsen. I may not use it, but knowing it was afforded to me would definitely ease the very real end-stage condition of terminal anxiety, says Helen. She goes on to say that I appreciate the institutional racism is real and needs to be addressed, but please don't deny this to me, my right to die as I wish. Carol says, I'm a palliative care nurse in hospice. Never once have any of our patients asked for euthanasia. With good and effective palliative care, we do not need euthanasia even raised. I am disturbed that David Seymour can so quickly state the majority of New Zealanders want euthanasia. Very biased reporting about this. Is this just on research on a small amount of citizens? Please listen to the palliative care sector. More after 6 on that.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia Tawa DNA. If his euthanasia bill survives the next parliamentary vote, ACT's David Seymour says he'll introduce significant amendments to allay fears expressed during the public hearings. That would include holding a referendum and restricting assisted dying only to those with a terminal illness. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Parliament's Justice Committee has recommended only technical changes after hearing a record 38,000 submissions. The main changes would happen at the committee stage if it gets that far. Mr Seymour says restricting the bill to the terminally ill is necessary to get political backing, but there's still work to do to secure majority support. The National MP and the committee's Deputy Chair Maggie Barry says she remains firmly opposed after months of hearing often harrowing stories. She believes political opposition has hardened as a result of the public hearings. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A legal academic is worried the end-of-life choice bill's loose criteria could mean vulnerable people end up feeling pressured into dying. The group Lawyers for Vulnerable New Zealanders says there's no guarantee the proposed law will only apply to terminally ill people. Its spokesperson, Dr. Huhana Hiki, is a legal academic and has multiple sclerosis. She says the bill is catered for those who are confident and articulate, and she is concerned for the elderly, the lonely, and especially Māori.
You're putting poor people, people at risk, into a position where they may end up having no choice other than to choose euthanasia because Pharmac refused to fund their drugs, others refuse to give them care, and we have a very underfunded palliative care system.
Dr. Huhana Hiki. The Arms Amendment Bill has passed its second reading in Parliament. The bill passed 119 votes for and 1 vote against from the ACT Party MP David Seymour. It will go through its committee stages and third reading tomorrow. The bill seeks to ban most semi-automatic rifles in order to prevent a repeat of the Christchurch mosque attacks that killed 50 people. Earlier, MPs on both sides of the House spoke in support of the bill and repeatedly referred to failed attempts to tighten gun laws in the past. The RSA will cancel 2/3 of Auckland's Anzac Day services in light of last month's shootings at 2 Christchurch mosques. Just 26 commemorations will go ahead in Auckland, compared to 84 last year. There's no suggestion of any threat, but Auckland District RSAs, the Auckland Council and the police are merging some events to ensure police can adequately resource them. The RSA National President, BJ Clark, says he understands how disappointing this will be for RSA members and the public who can't go to their local service. Mr Clark says the cancellations are solely the RSA's decision, made after talking to the police following the tragic events in Christchurch. RSA representatives in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin say at this stage their services will be running as usual. The jury in the trial of a top military attaché have heard how a covert camera in New Zealand's US Embassy was discovered. Alfred Harold Keating is on trial in the Auckland District Court, accused of attempting to make an intimate visual recording. It's the Crown's case that the 59-year-old hid the small motion-activated camera in a unisex toilet in the Washington DC Embassy. This morning, Stephen Warren, an embassy staffer working for the Defence Force, described what happened in the bathroom on the 27th of July 2017.
I picked up the black box which was on top of the radiator. I held it in my hand, I spun it around. I noticed some small holes and what appeared to be a lens of some type.
Stephen Warren said he took the camera to a trusted colleague before reporting it to a security official. Mr Keating has strenuously denied the allegations. Progress to reinstate a vital West Coast bridge between Fox Glacier and Franz Josef has hit a snag. Army engineers were due to launch a replacement Waiho River bridge from one side of the river to the other today before securing it in place and reopening it on Friday. The original Bailey Bridge was washed away in floods 2 weeks ago, meaning that motorists have had to drive hundreds of extra kilometres to travel between the two towns or use a helicopter taxi. But the Transport Agency says a crane part now needs to be brought down from Nelson before the work can be completed. It's unable to say at this stage if Friday's reopening will be delayed. And the West Coast is bracing for more heavy rain. Met Service meteorologist Claire Nixon says 2 weather warnings have been issued for the region tonight.
For Fiordland north of Doubtful Sound, we have a warning out from 9 p.m. tonight until 1 p.m. on Wednesday, and that's for 90 to 120 millimetres of rain to accumulate. And then for Westland south of Ortela, we have a warning out from 9 p.m. tonight through till 9 p.m. on Wednesday for 150 to 200 millimetres of rain about the ranges and 80 to 100 millimetres elsewhere.
Claire Nixon says thunderstorms could also hit, causing 20 to 30 millimetres of rain per hour. It's coming up to 6:05. The Warriors will tonight appeal the citing of forward Jazz Te Vanga for a dangerous tackle in the side's win over the Gold Coast Titans last Friday. Te Vanga faces a one-match ban for the dangerous contact charge, which could see him miss Saturday's showdown with the 4th-placed South Sydney Rabbitohs. Warriors coach Stephen Kearney feels the NRL hasn't been consistent in its citing.
There was another tackle which was very similar the day after by another, I'm not going to say who, but by another which looked very similar, if not, worse, and there was no charge. So it's just about the consistency of the process.
Stephen Kearney. Meanwhile, South Sydney skipper Greg Inglis will miss the Warriors game as he continues to recover from illness and a shoulder injury. The Football Fern skipper Ali Riley says being more organised defensively and backing themselves on attack is the key to toppling Norway. The 19th ranked New Zealanders play the second of 2 games against the 12th ranked Norwegians in Spain tomorrow morning as part of their build-up to the World Cup in France in June. The Ferns lost the opening match 1-0, but Riley says they know where they need to improve.
Getting our press right, not letting a team break us down centrally. And then again, it comes down to a little bit of that courageousness, that confidence when we are on the ball, to go 1v1, to take shots and have a little bit more of that free attacking style that we may not have had in the past.
The match kicks off at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Meanwhile, Chelsea are up to 3rd in the English Premier League after a 2-0 win over West Ham. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, there's a window on the world of the Me Too movement in France. Tonight's episode of Bang is brought to you by the letter K for kink, although it's really just as much about the C word, consent. And this week's After Dinner speaker, our native fish geek Stella McQueen, wants to talk about kōura, our freshwater crayfish. They look quite domineering, but actually they're rather submissive. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine with isolated showers in the west of Northland. Waikato to Taranaki and Taumaranui. Fine today, a few showers spreading from the west tomorrow. Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu. Also Gisborne through to Wairarapa. Mainly fine weather. Horowhenua to Wellington. Fine today with a few showers tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough. Fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing about the ranges. Bulla and northern Westland, rain developing overnight with heavy falls and possible squally thunderstorms later tomorrow. For southern Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north later today with heavy falls and thunderstorms easing to showers in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, fine today, rain later tomorrow. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, rain developing overnight or tomorrow morning with brief heavy falls easing at night. Chatham Islands, patchy rain clearing tomorrow evening. It's 6:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. David Seymour is now willing to rule out people with grievous and irremediable conditions from his euthanasia bill. This means it may only apply to terminally ill people with 6 months to live. The Justice Select Committee tabled its report on the end-of-life choice bill in Parliament today, while a group of lawyers has formed to fight the move to allow people to get a doctor to give them a fatal injection. It's made a number of technical changes, including extending the date the new law would take effect by 6 months to allow government agencies more time to prepare. The report also recommends people should be able to administer the lethal dose themselves. At present, the bill just specifies a medical practitioner. I took the ACT Party leader through some of the contentious aspects of his bill, starting with the age restriction of 18 years. The Attorney-General considered this might be a breach of our human rights provisions, so I asked David Seymour if he would be comfortable for children as young as 16 to choose euthanasia.
I very deliberately put 18 in this bill. That is the age of adulthood for most decisions that New Zealanders are able to make. And I don't want to get into an argument about what the Attorney-General said, but if you go to the next paragraph from the one you've just read, he actually said that Parliament always has to choose an age. It's chosen a range of ages for different things, and Parliament is quite within its right to choose the age of 18, which is what it's done.
How can you guarantee that there'll be no creep? Belgium includes children of all ages, and as you would know, children under 12 have been killed there using euthanasia legislation.
Well, that's not quite right, but ultimately Belgium
What's not right about that, Mr Seymour? A child the age of 9, a child the age of 11, and a child and a child who's 17 in most recent times have ended their lives under this law.
Okay, well, there you go. I mean, you said that they've been killed. That's quite a different criteria from what actually happened. Look, they've developed protocols there that I disagree with. That no English-speaking country that has an assisted dying law has considered. And ultimately, the way they did that is they actually had to go back to their Parliament and pass another law. People can argue about what Parliament might do in the future, but I'd be very surprised if New Zealand was ever prepared to consider that, and it's certainly not being considered in this law.
The other issue raised is that the line may be blurry around what is considered a grievous and irremediable medical condition. And some of the conditions that have been raised that may qualify are cystic fibrosis, diabetes, dementia, rheumatoid arthritis, gluten intolerance was one of the ones named. What's off limit for you?
Well, first of all, who's saying that?
It's contained in the report.
So some submitters have said that. It doesn't mean that it's a valid opinion. None of those would be able to qualify unless they fitted a variety of other conditions. They'd have to be in an advanced state of irreversible decline in capability. They would have to be people who, in their own view, could not be have their suffering alleviated in any other way. They would have to be people who are of sound mind and able to decide and make a decision and understand the ramifications of the decision for themselves. I think if you think back through those criteria, then none of the cases that you named would actually qualify. Having said that, we're actually proposing to remove the condition of having to be grievous and irremediable anyway, and leave it for people who have a prognosis of terminal illness within 6 months. So I think, frankly,
so only terminal illness. You're going to go to only terminal illness.
Yeah, that's right. So just to go back a step, the fact that the report has acknowledged that one of the 38,000 submitters said something doesn't actually make it correct. Number two is that it is not true that any of those people that you named could have accessed
cystic fibrosis.
The bill. Well, they'd have to be in an advanced state of irreversible decline in capability. So that is something that, you know, potentially they could. But the idea that merely having cystic fibrosis would qualify you for an assisted death under the bill as drafted is absolutely untrue. But thirdly, Lisa, the proposal is and I don't think the bill will pass otherwise, to take the conditions of people with a grievous and irremediable condition and no terminal illness out of the criteria anyway. So there's 3 different reasons why that may be in the report, but it's frankly mischievous and misleading to say that that's an implication of this bill.
How many people would qualify right now under the definitions that you've just stated, the scope of the bill? How many people would qualify to go down this process of assisted death?
So if you look at the sort of spectrum of countries that have bills like this, ours is towards the more conservative end of that spectrum, particularly as is proposed to make it terminal only. In countries at the more conservative end of the spectrum, and I'm mostly talking about the American states such as Oregon, you end up with about 0.5% of all people who die using the bill. Countries at the more liberal end, where they allow people to do things in different ways,
That's people who exercise their right, though, isn't it, Mr Seymour? That's people who exercise their right. My question is how many would be in that group who were able to access this legislation if they wanted to?
Yeah, that's not a figure that I have.
Right.
But you can work backwards from the numbers that I've given you. So if I can just finish answering that question, because people might be interested in how many people actually use it as well. In the American states, it's about 0.5% of all people who die. So in New Zealand, you're looking at around about 100 or 200 people per year, perhaps, who might actually use the bill. In the more liberal states, it's more like 2%. So you might be looking at 400 to 600 people per year. In Canada, which we're reasonably close to, it's about 1% of all people. How many people might be eligible? Well, it would be the number of people who at any given time have a terminal illness, but in a way I think that's the wrong question, because one of the criteria of eligibility is that you have to believe that this is the right and only way to end your particular suffering. If you don't believe that, then you fail at one of the eligibility criteria.
What
and that's why
coercion?
I answered the question the way I did, that you're both the same.
What about coercion? Because that is a concern for a lot of people, that people who are terminally ill may feel like they're a burden on others. They may feel coerced by family members or anyone. What about coercion, Mr Seymour?
If I thought there was a problem with coercion, I wouldn't be doing this. You've got to remember, I'm a libertarian. I believe that people should be free to make their own choices. How do you know there's not going to be a problem with coercion, though? How can you be so sure about that? Well, I was just about to answer that question. Like I was saying, my personal set of views are that if there was coercion and if that was an issue, I wouldn't be doing this. I would be prevented by my own view of the world from having ever gone down this path. How did I satisfy myself, and why do I think people should be satisfied that coercion is not an issue? Well, like many of these things, it's good to step away from the speculation that you hear from those motivated opponents within New Zealand and start examining the hard data from overseas. And what we find there is that the people who access assisted dying are people who are generally more likely to have access to palliative care, people who are more likely to have health care in countries where that's private, people who are more usually wealthier, usually more educated, people who are used to making their own decisions throughout their lives. Now, if it was the other way around, and the people who were using assisted dying were overwhelmingly people who perhaps had less access to palliative and health care, people who were less used to making their own choices throughout life, then you might think, well, geez, the overriding mode here is people are being pushed into it. I think what the data actually shows us is that this is something that people make as a choice for themselves, and that's the data from all around the world where it's been used.
David Seymour there, and just some more of your feedback on this debate. This person says, I would say that David Seymour is a small, organised and vocal minority. And Stephen says, there are two certainties in life, death and taxes. David Seymour wants to decrease one, certainty, and increase the other. And this from Margaret. She says, I totally disagree with Huhana. This is Dr. Huhana Hiki, who is opposed to the legislation as it is drafted at the moment. For many old terminal patients, the the palliative care available does not include the appropriate pain-killing drug regime. It's only approved if you're in hospital care. I have seen 2 close relations suffer terribly and unnecessarily. I liken this opposition to the hype and misinformation of the gun lobby. Please, please, please ask them to tone down the rhetoric and allow those sane last-stage patients to make their own choices. This is the first issue that I have agreed and applaud David Seymour for. That one from Margaret. Keep your feedback coming. We would love to hear from you. 2/3 of Auckland's Anzac Day commemorative events have been ditched this year because of security concerns in the wake of the Christchurch mosque attacks. Auckland District RSAs, the Auckland Council and the police have been working together to merge smaller events with larger ones. Just 26 events will go ahead compared to last year's 84, so police can adequately resource each one. The police and RSAs say it's a precautionary measure and there is no information to indicate there's a threat to any Anzac service. The RSA National President BJ Clark spoke with our reporter Jordan Bond.
I know that the District President Graham Gibson and the police and the RSAs up there have been working very cooperatively to make it as easy as possible to ensure that the police are able to support the services as they wish. And just to ensure that we cover all bases.
Are you a little bit disappointed that this sort of thing has to happen?
Oh, of course I am. There's no two ways about it. We would just, as all of New Zealand would want to, is to get on with life. But we have a responsibility to ensure that we work with the police. We take guidance. RSAs actually have contacted the National Office and asked us for guidance. So therefore we contacted the police and the police have worked with us, they've given us advice and, we will try and ensure that we carry out their advice so that they are able to provide the support that they wish to do. I mean, the sad thing is that we will have, providing the threat level stays as it is, and we see every day our police walking around the country who are fully armed, and that will in fact be what you will see at an Anzac service.
And that's RSA National President BJ Clark speaking to our reporter Jordan Bond. RSA representatives from Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin say at this stage all their Anzac services will be running as normal. And just a warning that our next story contains graphic content. We advise audience discretion. A Kapiti Coast councillor whose penis was measured during his trial for indecently assaulting a staff member is seeking to overturn both his conviction and sentence. Last year, a jury found David Scott guilty of rubbing his genitals against the woman. He sought a discharge without conviction, saying his roles as a JP and Rotarian could be affected if that was not granted. But Judge Peter Hobbs convicted him and fined him $1,500. Anne-Marie May attended today's appeal hearing.
David Scott's lawyer Barbara Hunt told the Court of Appeal that despite the incident taking place in a crowded room, no one saw the thrusting and grinding which the complainant said had occurred. She said against that backdrop, the decision was made to measure her client's penis, an action which she described as being like what would be seen in a schoolboy locker room. Ms Hunt said it would have been unsettling for the jury and should not have taken place.
That was a trial tactic which misfired. It was degrading to the appellant. It was insulting to the complainant. It attracted a frenzy of attention, but in my submission it was inconsistent with that fundamental defence that he did not do it and he could not have done it.
Barbara Hunt said the penis measuring was such an irregularity there was a risk it had caused a miscarriage of justice. She asked the Court of Appeal to allow new evidence to be admitted and agreed that evidence would have been available at the first trial, but said the fact it had not been produced at that stage was an error on the part of Scott's former lawyer. The court suppressed details of the new evidence. Ms Hunt said the sentencing judge, Peter Hobbs, had also made several errors, including elevating the seriousness of her client's offending. She said the behaviour complained about had overtones of workplace bullying, but if it did occur, it was at a low level. There was a generational divide between Scott and his victim, and he had a different upbringing and attitude.
And this is something that Your Honours might take into account. The fact is it's unacceptable behaviour, but we have to be careful not to elevate the criminality, the culpability of the offence because of the current political climate.
However, the Crown lawyer Simon Barr questioned Ms Hunt's claim that her client's trial lawyer had made a mistake, saying Scott had the most senior defence counsel in Wellington acting for him at trial, so it was not a case where a relatively junior trial lawyer was making important decisions. He said Scott said in his appeal statement it was an important part of his defence that any touching of the woman was done to protect his groin because he had recently had surgery. But Mr Barr said the trial lawyer's statement referred to a discussion about that matter.
The difficulty is that prior to the trial, the appellant and trial counsel expressly discussed this topic, and trial counsel advised the appellant that he was sceptical about his account. And of course it goes without saying that these are the very types of issues that trial counsel was obliged to frankly advise their clients about.
Mr Barr said David Scott was now effectively saying he wished in hindsight he had run his defence differently. The Court of Appeal reserved its decision. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
A petition by a lifelong Crusaders fan to keep the Super Rugby team's name has garnered more than 26,000 signatures. Last week, the Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby announced they will hire a research company to get feedback and provide recommendations on the team's name and imagery following the mosque shootings in Christchurch. There have been calls to change the team's name because of its links to medieval wars between Christians and Muslims. Middleton resident and Crusaders fan Shane Cannons started the petition. He told our reporter Brooke Jenner why he's opposed to a name change.
And I just thought that's unfair. I think Canterbury's been through enough with earthquakes, and now with this terrorist attack, we don't need to lose our Crusaders as well, the name. So I thought, well, if people can petition for other things, why can't I petition for this? So hence where we're at.
Do you see where people are coming from when they believe that the name should be changed, given its association to military efforts by Christians against Muslims in historical times?
I understand that that did happen historically, 1,000 years ago. And personally, I don't see any connection whatsoever with the Crusaders rugby team and, you know, the atrocities that happened all those years ago, because I don't see them as those kind of Crusaders, the Knights Templars. I see them as a positive way. King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table. You know, men gathering together to go to battle for their realm, that kind of stuff, not, you know, going out slaughtering thousands of people or whatever.
Do you think that it's a time where we do need to acknowledge what happened in Christchurch, though, and it would almost be naive to continue supporting the name that has such historic references and meaning behind it?
I think the first thing is we have acknowledged what's happened. You know, the Prime Minister has done some extraordinary steps, you know, to acknowledge the fact and you know, the deep sadness that the whole country feels. Well, it's probably not just the country, it's probably all around the world. But it's still, it's a tough one, because I don't feel the relevance of that and the name of a rugby team, albeit, yes, that particular name has historical. I think anyone with half a brain can work out that that has no association.
Would you keep supporting the team if they had rebranded and had a new name, though? Would there be just as much support for the team as there is now?
I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I would be extremely disappointed. You know, it's so hard, because we are known as One-Eyed Cantabrians, and that's the simple fact. They are part of our family. They are our community. They are, you know, Canterbury.
Shane Cannons talking to our reporter Brooke Jenner. And now a story for all the Beatles fans out there. A new clip of the band's only live appearance on the BBC show Top of the Pops has been unearthed randomly in Mexico. The silent snippet features the Fab Four miming to the song Paperback Writer and was filmed by a viewer off his TV set in 1966. The BBC's Colin Patterson has the details.
The Beatles rehearsing for their only ever live Top of the Pops appearance. Back in 1966, BBC shows were recorded on videotape, very expensive at the time, so wiped after a couple of weeks. Thought lost forever, until now. The Fab Four, a fab find. 11 seconds of paperback writer unearthed in Mexico.
1 inch, ranks Intel for film, domestic videotape, D2, D3.
Kaleidoscope specialise in tracking down missing TV. A Mexican Beatles fan got in touch after buying an 8mm film reel shot at home by a Liverpudlian family.
I think if you're a Beatles fan, it's a holy grail. There's no doubt about that. The Beatles only did Top of the Pops once live. And to think that, somebody in Liverpool was filming, off the telly in 1966, so to find it again after all those years later was just stunning.
At the Beatles Story exhibition, we showed the find to an expert.
Yeah, that's really crazy that nobody else has seen that.
How important a discovery is this?
Well, we already have loads and loads of kind of audiovisual artifacts, more or less, that we can study. The idea that there's more out there is absolutely, it's amazing, really. There's no other word for it.
And it's not just Beatles footage which has been rediscovered. More than 240 lost Top of the Pops performances saved thanks to a fan of the show who recorded them at home.
Hello, this is Charles Henry Butler Pierce in Bangor, North Wales, making a test recording in September 1976. Hello, hello.
The new discoveries, including T-Rex performing Metal Guru, will be featured later this month at the BFI South Bank's Music Believed Wiped event.
And that's all we've got time for on Checkpoint today. Thanks for all your feedback on the Right to Die debate. You can check out the interviews that we did with Huhana Hiki and MP David Seymour. They'll be online this evening. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Parliament's Justice Committee has reported on the end-of-life choice bill as a group of lawyers against the proposed law says it could put pressure on vulnerable people. The Arms Amendment Bill will go through its committee stages and third reading tomorrow after passing its second reading in Parliament this afternoon. And Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin RSA say their Anzac Day services will run as usual, but 2/3 of Auckland's commemorations are to be cancelled. Our next news is coming up at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Quite happy to sign something that says we have climate change.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
How those relationships between women and animals help both species in their post-recovery.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice